This is a topic that's really close to a lot of our hearts, I'll say. And joining us today is Erima Dall. She's from the University of Sydney, an honours student and also a member of the Student Representative Council, the SRC. She also happens to be the lady who put forward the application, or should I say nominated, for Sydney University to take on the Boycott Divestment Sanctions movement, so BDS. Welcome to the show, Erima.
Thanks for having me. Hi.
Hi. Now, for those who weren't aware of actually what was happening, in the last week, there has been initiatives in which usually there are academic, I guess, what would you call them, sponsorships between different countries.
Partnerships.
And there was one between Sydney Uni and Israel University. And one of the academics at Sydney University actually...
Professor Jake Lynch from the Centre for Peace and Conflict Studies
actually came out and said he actually refused, and his backing for that was the Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions. Now, Erima, for those who are not aware of Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions, what is BDS?
The Boycott, Divestment Sanctions was launched in 2005 as an international movement to call on, civil society organisations to actually join together in calling for a boycott against Israel, very much sort of along the spirit of the boycott of apartheid South Africa, as a way of putting some pressure on the Israeli government that our own governments actually are refusing to do, and in fact in Australia are very complicit in the actions of Israel. And so BDS, I think, is a way for the international community to actually put forward some pressure and actually stand behind the cause of Palestinian liberation, when the legal channels and our government simply are stepping back and washing their hands of Israel's ongoing criminal activity. So it's very heartening actually to see that happening.
But Erima, as noble as that is, there's been a lot of people saying, well, why can't we separate the politics from the academia of it all? What about the benefits that an Israeli university partnering with Sydney Uni could bring to the students? What would you put to that?
Well, I think it's completely the wrong way around. Like, it's obviously the University of Sydney itself that has made what is a political decision to engage in whether it's an academic exchange program, as they have wanted to have with the Hebrew University, and that's what the particular boycott at Sydney Uni was over, or whether it's the relationship between the Medical Centre at Sydney University and their exchange program and partnership with the Technion Institute of Technology in Israel. It's the institution of the university itself is already taking a very political stand in materially and diplomatically supporting Israel and normalising that relationship on campus. So I think the only way to deal with that is actually to put forward the counter-political view and say that the Australian university should not participate in either normalising the kind of activity of the Israeli state, and certainly not actually helping it through this exchange of material and academic relationship.
Definitely, and I think kind of putting it in that context actually makes a lot of sense, because since the news came out about Professor Jake Lynch's opposition to hosting the Israeli academic, a lot of people have been throwing around things like anti-Semitism, this is an attack, this is undemocratic, and things like that. And it's nice to see it in its context. As you said, it was a conscious decision to develop this link in the first place. And hence, this is kind of another conscious decision to kind of counter that, right? So I want to talk about your decision to actually bring this to the Student Council. What was your motivations to actually get the Student Council to actually back up?
And how was it received as well? Because I can imagine it would have been such a big topic to throw out there as well.
Well, the reason that I thought that it was necessary to get the Student Representative Council to back it was largely the amount of pressure that Jake Lynch, who's the director of the Centre for Peace and Conflict Studies at Sydney Uni, that both he and the centre were coming under a lot of pressure. The Vice-Chancellor called the boycott inappropriate. The Australian ran about 10 consecutive articles denouncing it. Even Kevin Rudd's the Foreign Minister, and Chris Evans, who was the Education Minister, Higher Education Minister at the time, felt necessary to wade in and denounce this decision as, as inappropriate and undermining Australia's interests and relationship with Israel. So I thought that an expression of support from the student body, and particularly from the elected student council, to say that we do think this is appropriate, we're proud of Jake Lynch's courage and we support, CPAC's position, that was a very important stand to take. And I think what was so fantastic was the breadth of support on the left from, political organisations that, including the Greens, who have been very supportive, but also the left Labor students on the council supported this, including the president of Sydney University SRC. So that was a real step forward. And what you've actually seen now is a broader debate taking place inside the New South Wales Labor Party that I think shows that actually by raising this even at the local level of the SRC, it's pushed the question into broader society, into the ranks of the New South Wales Labor Party, and that's quite important.
Definitely. Yeah. I don't think, though, the meeting was without its, heatedness. An article that came out in the student magazine for Sydney University was actually describing, shouting matches, and it was actually funny because it was like, okay, we didn't kind of get world peace, but at the end, some members were actually asked to sit down. Security was nearly called at one point, but at the end, everybody kind of hugged it out, right? So as someone who was kind of in the middle of all this, did you feel like it was, when it comes to Israel, which is a very, very sensitive topic, and boycott and academia and things like that, did you think that this time it was actually more about putting people outside their comfort zone? Australia's traditionally been aligned with Israel. No one's ever questioned that. When Marrickville Council came out a few years ago to support BDS, everybody was going crazy about it, right? So it was kind of putting it back into the agenda, putting us in a position as Australians that we're not comfortable with. Do you think it was more the hype about that rather than the actual academic decision, I guess, which, strategically, I'm sure with other countries such decisions are made, but when you put Israel in the picture, it creates a lot of sensitivity and a lot of sentiments.
No, it's true. There's actually been some discussion and exposure of an arms manufacturing company, Raytheon, that's invested in the USDY Centre, and I think by comparing the responses to the two issues, you can see that people are quite comfortable, to call out arms manufacturers, but once you've got the question of Israel-Palestine in there as well, it does become, hyper politicized, and it's very sensitive, and it does expose, I think, the depth to which, Zionist ideology has been largely accepted in the political elite of Australia, in the mainstream papers, and that does make it difficult. But I don't think that it was, obviously everyone loves a crisis, and those sorts of news stories beat up the issue, but I think actually it was a really quite good and important debate. There was some, unfortunate conflating of, anti-Semitism with what, certainly...
But Erima, isn't it interesting the way certain stories are highlighted in that manner? Because I remember maybe it was a month or two ago, one of the New South Wales MLCs, MLC Shoebridge from the Greens Party, had this epic speech in Parliament where he basically was ripping into all the parliamentarians who had agreed to go on this trip with the Friends of Israel group to tour Israel, and didn't actually visit any of the Palestinian territories or the occupied territories. And he was basically talking about how, what the effect of such visits are, and how we're supposed to be a little bit more open-minded and looking at both sides of the coin. And that also brings me to another prominent person who's came out in the last couple of days, and that's Stephen Hawkins, who's also basically bailed from a conference he was supposed to be going to on the invitation of the Israeli Prime Minister. He's now basically said he's no longer going to be going to that conference. And originally it was said that it was for medical reasons, and it's later come out to be because of this very same academic boycott. So when even somebody who is a proclaimed atheist is coming out and saying this, I don't think you can throw around the anti-Semitic label anymore. But also, how does that make you feel as one of the activists within Sydney University working towards this outcome?
I guess it's like, Sydney Uni is playing out in a microcosm sense what's happening on a macro scale globally. And it's the very same issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think those of us who are advocating Palestinian rights have heard that, label again and again, and you only have to look at organisations like, Jews Against the Occupation or the work of someone like Anthony Lowenstein. We've had actually someone who signed on to this statement, Abigail Abrabanel, is, Jewish. She's an author at Melbourne University. Like, there's plenty of Jews themselves who support BDS, and I think actually it's the Zionist ideology that wants to conflate anti-Semitism with an opposition to Israel's policies. That's certainly not the position of people who are promoting BDS. I think that's simply an argument that we're are faced with constantly. But as you said, it has become quite mainstream. The New Zealand government actually divested its superannuation. The New Zealand government actually divested its superannuation from 3 Israeli companies that were implicated in constructing illegal settlements and helping to build the apartheid wall. So, that is quite a significant institutional support for BDS.
And even in Ireland, the Teachers Association came out and they were supporting the BDS. So, and I guess it was really interesting as Australians to see the global debate being played out when Marrickville Council decided to make a decision, which is just a little council in the middle, of Sydney. They made that decision. It was so much kind of sentiments and upheat and a lot of issues going back and forth. When we forget to realise, this is not some fringe radical movement. It's actually a pretty global, well-recognized movement. And I think when people start seeing it in that way, it becomes a lot less emotional. But for some reason, every time you put Israel in the picture or Palestine in the picture, it becomes emotional. I mean, on another note, earlier this week, Google reported that in their searches, they actually started recognizing Palestine as a word when you're doing territory searches instead of just occupied territories. And Israel had a cry about that also. So it's, I guess, it's a really volatile mix when you do put in, Palestine and Israel in a conversation. So just to wrap it up, if there are students at Sydney Uni or others who are interested in following this up, where would they go?
Well, the Students for Justice for Palestine group on campus is very active, and they're organising a forum coming up with Jake Lynch and some discussion of these issues. So I definitely recommend contacting them. Unfortunately, I don't have contact details on me, but
that's okay.
Sure they can get in touch with you. And there's an active Students for Justice in Palestine organisation, and contact the SRC. But what we're actually hoping at Sydney Uni is that we might be able to take this the motion that was passed by the SRC to add its signature to this sign-on statement, and actually from that launch a campaign to enforce that decision and push for the university to divest from its relationship, particularly with Technion, the Institute for Technology in Israel. Has quite close relationship with the medical centre at Sydney Uni, and is quite directly implicated actually in weapons development research for companies, the Elbit System company that helped build the apartheid wall and these sorts of things. So that's hopefully where we're going to be able to take this.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we wish you the best of luck with that, Erima. Thank you very much for taking the time.
Thanks very much for having me.
Our pleasure.
Okay.
And that was Erima Dall from Sydney University. And we're just going to go on a short break in a couple of minutes. We'll be right back to discuss the rest of what we've been up to last week and more about what's coming up in the coming weeks. So stick around. You're listening to The Y Factor on 87.6 FM.